CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. We're open for business and the economy will return to normal growth, China's Vice Premier tells the World Economic Forum.
And I'm here in Davos, where the talk today was about working together to boost global trade.
Our other headlines: China's economy grows by 3% last year, exceeding some forecasts but below the official targets.
The end of the road, the UK's big hope for a battery manufacturer for electric vehicles.
And Russia's top military chief makes an unannounced visit to Ukraine, just as Moscow reveals plans for a major shake-up of its armed forces.
China has been setting out its stall in a post-pandemic world. The message is China is open for business. Vice Premier Liu He has been addressing political and business leaders at the World Economic Forum in the Swiss resort of Davos.
He said more foreign investment is welcome and is confident China's economy will return to normal growth in 2023. Well, our correspondent Juliet Mann is in Davos for us. Juliet, a positive message from China's Vice Premier. What else did he say?
Well, it was a speech designed to help the world understand the next chapter for China. Liu He said that this overall theme of fragmentation in a cooperation in a fragmented world really couldn't come at a more important time, and that mutual understanding was very much a prerequisite to that cooperation. He talked about the economy, and he said that growth in China was at 3% in 2022, and that jobs and that prices were stable. He also talked about China opening up and said that, as an official state policy, it was really important that there's a catalyst for reform, for development in China, and the way to really energise that growth. He said opening up the doors of China, well, you know what, they can only get wider. The possibility of a world recession, the corresponding risks, how to enhance cooperation, and the key role that China can play in stoking global economic recovery. Vice Premier Liu He's address at the World Economic Forum in Davos was an indication of China's willingness to engage on key issues.
China's national reality dictates that opening up to the world is a must, not an expediency. We must open up wider and make it work better. We oppose unilateralism and protectionism and look forward to strengthening comprehensive international cooperation with all countries for world economic stability and development and the promotion of economic re-globalization.
Liu He is in Davos to meet global leaders and CEOs from tech, consumer and industrial companies. The message? China's open for business and keen to connect. After all, China contributes some 36% of global growth.
How to strengthen cooperation in a fragmented world is a real problem we all face. We must face it squarely, dig deep into the causes of fragmentation, promote positive sum games, identify the possible converging areas of cooperation, and explore the mechanisms for doing so. We must also work together to firmly safeguard world peace. We should be grateful that this year's Davos Forum presents us with an opportunity to do just that.
The European Commission too talked about taking a global approach to trade and the green transition, but cautioned it needs to be reciprocal.
China has made boosting clean tech innovation and manufacturing a key priority of its 5-year plan. That's good. It dominates global production in sectors like electric vehicles and solar panels, which are essential for the transition. But competition on net zero must be based on a level playing field.
That's why Liu He reiterated that countries need to abandon the Cold War mentality and seek peaceful coexistence. Next stop for the Vice Premier, Zurich, for a face-to-face with US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. The talks come after a pledge made late last year between President Xi and Biden to relieve lingering trade tensions and enhance communication between the world's two largest economies. Let's talk about that communication being enhanced a little bit more with Simon Freakley, the CEO of Alex Partners. We always talk to you at Davos, although it has been remotely. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much.
I'll come around a little bit. So look, let's start off talking about what the vibe is here, what it's like. Is everyone positive or are they really bleak and miserable?
I think they're split down the middle. I think half are preparing themselves for a recession, half have convinced themselves there won't be a recession. I think the jury is out at this stage.
So there are different ideas on how to stoke growth. But let's talk about China and that speech from Liu He. I mean, what really resonated for you in terms of China's commitment to cooperation?
Well, I think it could be a game changer. You know, I say that Davos is split down the middle as of this morning. You know, will we have a recession, will we not? I think the whole prospect of China opening up, the whole prospect of a Cold War narrative falling away, the prospect of maybe being in a more globalised world again, I think it could be a game changer.
And which particular sectors do you think might really benefit from that from China reopening?
Well, I think all sectors, honestly. I mean, I think that China has been the workshop of the world over the last 10, 15 years, and the prospect of that very joined-up world, I think, was terrifying for businesses of all sectors. So I think the prospect of being more joined up again, the prospect of more investment both ways, the prospect of really collaborating again in a global way, I think is very exciting.
Do you get the feeling that there's a different atmosphere here? Normally it's quite collaborative, there's a bit of a consensus at the World Economic Forum, yeah. But it does seem now there is a little bit of a split, maybe people doing their own thing with subsidies, for example?
Well, yes, I mean, I think that one of the dangers of Davos is it can be a bit full of platitudes, but I think there is a real narrative emerging of cooperation. I mean, obviously we've come through this major disruption of our lifetimes, COVID. We have this human tragedy of a ground war going on in Ukraine. I think there's a lot to feel down about, but actually business is feeling that there's an opportunity for growth, and actually notwithstanding a high interest rate environment, that actually maybe we won't head into a recession.
Something else that's going to be big here all week is climate change. And look, big names, big speeches. Ursula von der Leyen took to the stage. She talked about support for Ukraine, but also the green transition, saying the road to net zeros will be the greatest transformation of our times. Do you think Europe's got what it takes?
I don't know. And of course, one of the great tragedies is that as a result of this appalling war that's going on, is that people's focus has moved from the green transition to just sustainability of supply. So, accessing gas, accessing oil, making sure that European nations aren't dependent on Russian energy. And so I think that the danger was that energy transition had been put on the back burner. I think with this prospect of things opening up, I do think that maybe it'll come back into the foreground.
But Ursula von der Leyen didn't mention the cost of living crisis that's hitting Europe hard as well as around the world.
It's going to be huge. So what's happening with interest rates and mortgages and to people's disposable incomes, what's happening to energy prices which have rocketed, it absolutely will hit the pocket, it'll hit the consumer purse, and I think we will see that in all of the obvious industries.
Simon Freakley, Alex Partners, thank you very much indeed. Always a pleasure talking to you. I'm going to let you go and hobnob with all of the big wigs. Now, global leaders and heads of state, they've been zooming in and zooming out for high-level meetings, including Pakistan's foreign minister, who's actually just standing there doing another interview, Bill Bhutto Zahedi. I caught up with him earlier.
I had the privilege of meeting the Vice Premier of China here at Davos earlier today, and as far as his talk was concerned, the messaging about China being open for investment but also to engage with the world is very important, because there are many countries out there that perhaps want to or heighten geopolitical tensions or see their national interest in an increase of tensions. But Pakistan is not one of those countries. We would like to build bridges. We would like to find ground where countries can cooperate. We are facing many challenges that are, existential threats to the human race, whether it's the COVID pandemic, which was a once-in-a-100-year pandemic that we're still sort of feeling the aftermath of and the economic consequences. Climate change is devastating. All of us in Pakistan, we had the largest climate catastrophe in our history, with a third of our country's landmass underwater following the droughts, the historic drought in China. And recently, you would have seen that whether it's Australia or California, they're also facing flooding. So the climate crisis is something that we should be cooperating on. This conflict with Ukraine and Russia has its own complications. So I think I was very encouraged by the statement of the Vice Premier, and I believe that the vision and leadership that China is demonstrating through this difficult phase is much appreciated.
He also reiterated President Xi's line about moving away from that Cold War mentality and countries working much closer and cooperating rather than pushing it against each other. What opportunities do you think that brings for Pakistan and China?
I think first that this is the sort of leadership that is required on the world stage. It is time we move beyond small groupings and get out of old, outdated Cold War thinking. And the test for global leadership will not be of conflict. The test of global leadership would be about our ability to cooperate on the multitude of challenges that we do face. As far as Pakistan's role in all of this, in the past, Pakistan has played a role as a bridge between China and the rest of the world. We pride ourselves on the role we played in the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the United States in the past. And today, we would like to play the role as the bridge between the international community and China and encourage engagement, cooperation. We believe is good for our neighborhood, is good for the entire world if we can all work together to confront the challenges that we face. We're incredibly inspired by President Xi's vision and consistency on this topic as far as moving away from bloc politics, from Cold War mentality, and engaging with the world.
You know, there's a chill in the air here, and it's not just because we're up a mountain and that it's snowing. It's because there's a really bleak feeling amongst many of the delegates here about the future of the global economy, that there's this threat of recession. And all of the CEOs I've been speaking to, they say at top of their list of worries about 2023 is inflation, but also high on that list, as we heard from Pakistan's foreign minister, is climate. And it's a huge, huge focus of the programme. I mean, looking at all of the speeches and the panels, climate comes up in terms of the title of the panel, but also the credentials of the speakers in about a third of the sessions that are taking place over the week. So expect some real collaborative and inclusive action on climate change in the week ahead. Robin and Jamie, back to you in London.
Juliet, thank you for that. Juliet Mann enjoying the snow in Davos.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. China's population falls for the first time in 60 years as the national birth rate hits a record low.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch free on all of the major digital platforms, on smart TV or online, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
China's economy grew by 3% last year, exceeding some forecasts, but still well below the country's official target. Other than in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, it's the slowest growth for the world's second largest economy since the 1970s. Xu Setao is chief economist from Deloitte, China. I asked him how China's GDP figures compare to growth in previous years.
Of course, it's a big deceleration, but last year was so special. COVID and the war in Europe and all this, and also inflation shock in Western world. So I think 3%, after taking all this into account, is a solid number. But the most important thing is the worst is behind us. And this year, I'm looking at 4.5 to 5%.
So you think the worst is behind us then. What about the lifting of COVID restrictions? What impact will that have, do you think?
Oh, that's hugely positive. Not only you are going to unleash pent-up demand in so many areas, travel and so on and so forth, auto. I expect economy would demonstrate strong growth from second quarter this year. But more importantly, to lift zero COVID policy has restored investors' confidence in policymakers' capability in gauging various trade-offs. So I think psychologically, that was even more positive.
So today's figures are perhaps less good than previous years, but also better than analysts had forecast. What do you think that's down to?
I wouldn't say better than analysts' forecast. For example, my forecast was 3.2% last year, but 3% I think was a decent number. You may say this is the first time China didn't achieve intended growth target, but again, after taking into COVID and there's geopolitical tensions, and more importantly, rising interest rate environment led by the United States, I think 3% is quite respectable.
China's population has fallen for the first time in 6 decades. The new data shows the country's overall population dropped by 850,000 last year to 1.4118 billion. The national birth rate hit a record low with 6.77 births per 1,000 couple. Well, the analysts say much of the demographic downturn is the result of China's one-child policy enforced between 1980 and 2015. Populations are, of course, also shrinking and aging in other East Asian countries. Last year, South Korea broke its own record for the world's lowest fertility rate. The average number of children a South Korean woman will have is now 0.79. Japan also reported its lowest rate on record, with the average now at 1.3 children. Meanwhile, India is projected to overtake China as the world's most populous country in 2023. The estimates put its population at more than 1.4 billion people and continuing to grow. Well, the demographer and author Paul Morland is an expert in population trends around the world. He told me what China's population decline might mean for the country.
It does mean the workforce is going to start contracting if it hasn't already done so, and decades of Chinese growth partly based on population growth and a growth in the workforce over. It also means China's population will be aging very quickly, which raises big questions about how those older people will be cared for, something we in the West are already having to tackle.
Paul, if we believe population decline is a bad thing, what are the policy fixes, not just for China, but for other countries facing this?
Well, I believe very strongly there are no policy fixes. So I think you can shoot yourself in the foot and have really bad policies, and you can try very hard to throw money at the population to encourage them to have children. We've seen that in Russia, we've seen it in Hungary. The effects are very limited. The thing I think will make the difference is a cultural change. People actually have to want to have children, and they need to value children, and they need to love large families. And only that will make a difference. Government interventions can be extremely expensive, can take up huge chunks of national GDP, and they make a bit of difference on the edge. I mean, for example, you can make childcare more affordable if you want women in the workforce, which is absolutely essential today, and you can help with housing costs. But really, it's down to individuals and their appetite, their desire for family formation.
Africa has the youngest population worldwide. What does that mean for Africa and the rest of the world?
Well, it gives Africa an enormous opportunity to take centre stage in a globe where Africa has traditionally been quite peripheral. I mean, over the course of 150 years, Africans will go from about 7% to about 37% of the world's population. So there's enormous opportunity to grow economically, to become important as political powers, and to become important culturally. Whether Africa will grasp that opportunity as China grasped it when China entered this fantastic period of population growth from the 70s, that is going to be down to the individual countries within Africa. My guess is some will be very successful and some will not.
An electric vehicle battery startup hailed as key to the UK's green industrial revolution has collapsed into administration.
British Volt had planned to open a gigafactory in the northeast of England, creating more than 3,000 jobs, but it failed to secure emergency funding from investors, and its hundreds of employees have now been made redundant.
Our correspondent Andrew Wilson is following this story. So, Andrew, what went wrong here?
Well, first of all, local papers up in the district, up in the northeast, are reporting this as a loss of thousands of potential jobs. 300 people employed with British Volt at the moment, but the hope was that once it was up and running, there'd be jobs for 3,000 people and perhaps 5,000 more down the supply chain. So it was a great venture as far as levelling up Britain's concerned, as far as putting something on the map's concerned. Good location, Blythe Port, access to the sea, access to energy sources, all the sort of things you'd want for a factory to operate well and cleanly. And the idea was that this was going to be a gigafactory. This was going to produce batteries for the EV, the electric vehicle car industry. Something that's happening all over Europe, something that's being sparked and talked about as being an element of the future. However, right from the start, this venture was beset by worries. There were some resignations on the executive side, and there was a problem getting the thing built. And it seemed to be behind schedule. There seemed to be problems with inflation, problems with costs, but also problems with timing, which meant they missed out on a valuable government injection of about $100 million, part of a deal, if they got so far with the building plan that the government had committed towards helping this project, because it's part of levelling up Britain, which is something that Boris Johnson particularly talked a lot about, and so it went by the wayside. There were two potential buyers, two potential rescuers. One was organised by the shareholders themselves, putting in a bit more money to see if they can't see this project through, and the other was an obscure Indonesia-linked fund that hasn't really revealed much about itself beyond the fact that it's based there, which was also interested. Both of those, for various reasons, were turned down by the shareholders. So, at lunchtime today, best part of 300 employees were told electronically in a Zoom meeting that they were redundant, and they had 3 hours to go through the computer systems to get their information out and get their pay slips out as well.
Obviously a very difficult day in the northeast of England where the factory is based, but more broadly, what impact does this have on the UK electric vehicle building capacity?
So if you were to ask an industry expert at the moment what it means, they would say no battery production in the UK, no car industry in the UK. Simple as that. Once we get to 2030, when it's no longer have diesels and petrol vehicles for sale, and the thing steers full throat towards electric vehicles, this was the idea. And so this is a real barrier in that. There is one other gigafactory in the UK at the moment, and that's bought by and owned by Nissan to supply its own car production in Sunderland, which is not that far away from this one in Blythe Port. But if you look at Europe, there's upwards of 30 to 35 projects either underway, finished or planned in terms of producing batteries. So Europe is way ahead of the game. However, some other industries would say, well, actually, is there actually a realistic car industry left in Britain at all? Honda is closing its Swindon plant. It's Citroën, Peugeot, Fiat are all closing their car plants and changing them to creating vans and heavier vehicles, for which they'll get the batteries from Europe anyway. And the BMW that owns the Mini plant in Oxford, they're going to start building the electric version of that in China. So it does seem, anyway, there's something of an exodus in terms of the British car industry. Bear in mind that also by 2030, various regulations within the European Union and Europe-wide will change in that 70% of the innards of your car has to be produced locally for it to be viable for the European market. That was something that projects like this, British Volt, were heading for. We'll make the batteries, and that's the bulk of an electric car, therefore it'll be locally made, therefore it'll work in the European market. But the flip side is that actually it does look like this might be the beginnings of a retreat altogether for the British motor industry.
Andrew, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer XPeng is the latest to slash its prices in China, following in the footsteps of Tesla and Ceres. The price of the best-selling P7 in its home market is down by 12.5% to just over $31,000. There are broadly similar price cuts for its three other models. Industry forecasts predict demand for EVs in China will falter in the first quarter of the year.
Wages in the UK have grown at the fastest rate in more than 20 years, but soaring inflation has kept household spending subdued. Average pay rose by 6.4% between September and November, compared with the same period in 2021. The official figures also showed a gap between pay growth in the private sector and the public sector, where many workers are locked in wage disputes with the government.
Shares in French luxury goods group LVMH have risen to new highs, reaching market capitalisation of €400 billion, or $434 billion for the first time. The group, which includes Christian Dior, Louis Vuitton and Moet Hennessy, was already Europe's most valuable company.
France's Transport Minister has tried to reassure the public that there's enough petrol in the country, as workers in the energy, public transport and air travel sectors say they'll join a strike over a pension dispute. One of the largest trade unions, the CGT, has called for a strike in the refinery sector. The new pension plan would make people work longer before they can retire.
French consumers are facing tough months ahead as electricity bills are expected to rise up to 15% from the beginning of February. Currently, costs are bound to a maximum lift of 4% per household, though small businesses are facing much higher bills.
This all comes as the country attempts to cut its energy consumption in response to the energy crisis linked to the war in Ukraine. Our correspondent Louise Greenwood reports.
France is traditionally Europe's biggest exporter of electricity, but in the last few months concerns about the cold have seen that position switch. A squeeze on reserves fueled by the conflict in Ukraine left the country looking to its neighbours to keep the lights on. A mild winter has brought some relief, but it's still a tense time for suppliers. And for consumers, there's another shock around the corner. An energy price cap is set to be lifted in February, meaning bills could rise by as much as 15%. Natalie Hiven runs a restaurant in the northern city of Lille. She's been in the catering industry for 37 years, but says her business may have to close.
We've put our whole lives into this. It's like a house of cards collapsing. We have a life, children, a family to feed. And today, it's our only income. If we don't have any income, what are we going to do? We can't do anything anymore. We will have invested ourselves for 40 years in a profession that is slowly dying. We have the COVID period, and today we're at the end of it. We can't take it anymore. We get up in the morning, we're fed up. It's over. It's over. We get up for nothing.
For some, there are other possibilities, like older methods of heating and lighting which don't require electricity.
The cost of a day's worth of bread using wood is between $21 and $26 US, so it's less than with electricity. Wood prices have risen to a maximum of 5% over the last year. This is not even remotely close to the electricity prices, and in the case of a power outage, a wood-fired oven will always work.
Despite the fears of possible power outages, one factor has helped ease demand. It's the unseasonably mild winter in France. The comparatively warm January weather has extended across Europe. Grassy slopes and meadows where there should be snowy pistes and fields. Though there has been less severe winter weather, ministers are urging businesses and individuals to continue efforts to reduce energy consumption. Over the Christmas period, Paris dazzled, but with less sparkle than usual. More energy-efficient light bulbs shone for a shorter period each day and were taken down a whole week ahead of previous schedule. The new year has not brought cheer for many in France. The freeze on gas prices has gone, the fuel discount at the pump has been scrapped, and the coming rise in electricity costs will cause more uncertainty over monthly bills. Louise Greenwood, CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Banking giant Goldman Sachs posts its biggest profit miss in a decade. We're on Wall Street next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. We're open for business and the economy will return to normal growth. China's Vice Premier tells the World Economic Forum.
China's economy grows by 3% last year, exceeding some forecasts, but below the official target.
And the end of the road for the UK's big hope for a battery manufacturer for electric vehicles.
The European Union is looking to shore up trade with the United States after a rift between the two over a green initiative. The US Inflation Reduction Act was signed by President Joe Biden last year and comes with a $28 billion subsidy for new clean energy manufacturing. The EU says the scheme puts its own companies at a disadvantage. Well, our correspondent Rosie Burchard is in Brussels. So, Rosie, what's the latest in this transatlantic trade row?
Well, transatlantic ties are definitely under strain here. Both sides are talking about their friends across the Atlantic, saying they don't want any sort of a trade war, and they're looking to try and find practical solutions. But the European Union's concerns remain very clear, and they are that these subsidies, these tax cuts offered under the US Inflation Reduction Act, which are many of them offered only to US or North American producers, that is a concern for the European Union because they are worried point that companies which are essential to Europe's green energy transition could essentially be lured across the Atlantic by the pull, the attraction of those big subsidies which the United States is offering. Now, EU finance ministers have been meeting just across the road from where I am here in Brussels today. They've been discussing this. Of course, it's causing a lot of debate here in the European Union on how the EU should respond. Valdis Dombrovskis is the European Commission's Executive Vice President. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We want to work jointly with the US on climate change, and we do not want to see investments in green strategic sectors leak away from Europe, which would weaken a European economy. So we are engaging with US to find a practical solution on this, and also working on a broader European policy response in this regard.
There is a group of officials which are meeting from Washington and Brussels for technical talks on trying to hash out some sort of tweaks. But what Brussels is now realising is that this key piece of legislation in Washington is not going to change fundamentally, and that they may now, here in Brussels, need to think of a way to try and counter that in some sort of a form. And that is very much what is dominating leaders' agenda and the agenda of those finance ministers that have been gathering here in the Belgian capital.
So the European Commission talking about a policy response. What's it planning?
Well, we know, according to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, that the EU is planning to essentially relax its own state aid rules. So those are those rules which govern how much authorities, national governments, can give to industries. What that means is that in the short term, at least, there will likely be some sort of a loosening of those rules which will allow national governments in EU member states to pump funds into certain sectors. And the sectors in question here are those clean technology sectors. So, for example, batteries, electric cars. But that presents its own challenge because there are 27 EU member states, and they're very different in terms of the size of their economies, their GDPs, and particularly in terms of the fiscal space they have. So there are concerns that when these subsidy rules are lifted, or eased, I should say, you would see something like Germany, the European Union's biggest economy, being able to pump in a lot of money to its own sectors, but perhaps a country like Romania with a much smaller economy really being shut out, and that might distort fair competition within the European Union, which is, after all, a single market. And that's why the EU is also planning what it calls a sovereignty fund to try and ease out some of those differences which are expected. This is going to be a big debate among EU countries, and it will likely be what dominates a summit of EU leaders which is happening here in Brussels next month.
Rosie, thank you very much. Our correspondent Rosie Burchard in Brussels.
Now, a busy old week on Wall Street with a rise in cryptocurrency and a slew of fourth-quarter results, including Goldman Sachs reporting its worst earnings miss in a decade. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrace on Wall Street. John, so Goldman Sachs no longer sacks of gold. Bad news.
Oh, boom, boom. I wish I'd thought of that one. That's good. I'm going to use that in later programming. Yeah, you know, there was a lot of red on the screen today, and we're not used to seeing red on the screen associated with Goldman Sachs. And the reason for that is it is the big titan of Wall Street. It is one of the companies, and probably the company, really, that if you want to work on Wall Street, you want to work at Goldman Sachs for all sorts of reasons, not least of all because many of the senior staff go on to advise future administrations in Washington, D.C. That's how important Goldman Sachs is to the whole sort of web and waft of society here in America. And this company came down to earth with a massive, great big thump this morning, which is the reason for the red on the screen. Now, I just point out this section that they are in the process of laying off about 3,200 staff. They don't comment on this, but Bloomberg does. That's how we know. And they began doing it in Asia last week, and they're going to go on doing it. And they'll probably end up with more staff after these cuts than they had before COVID kicked in 2019. But that's the background to all of this. So today, we learned that their profits were down by 69%. That is an awful lot, isn't it? That's 69%. That's two-thirds, basically. And no one was quite expecting that. And it puts pressure on David Solomon, who is also a DJ at the weekend. He plays the platters that matter and the bangers in the clubs of Long Island. I suspect he'll be doing a bit less of that, frankly, going forward, because he's going to have to concentrate on the business now. And he was already under pressure even before today's numbers came out. And the 69% drop has taken about 100 points off the weighted Dow Jones Jones Industrial Average. Problem? Consumer banking and its deal-making division. Now, there simply were no deals to be made, really, in 2022, not really. And consumer banking, as far as Goldman Sachs is concerned, they didn't used to have a consumer banking division. They were very much an investment bank based on Wall Street. And then they introduced Marcus, which is an online bank. And it hasn't really had the penetration, I think, that many expected that it would do. So Goldman Sachs and all the other banks are on the defensive. They're all predicting a recession later this year. I mean, we did see Morgan Stanley, their great rival, topping expectations today despite a similar slide in deal-making. But they had record wealth management figures out this morning. JP Morgan Chase on Friday, profits up 6%, Citigroup down 21%. And they're putting aside millions of dollars in case there's a recession this year. I saw Juliette at the top of our show today in Davos, and there is a survey today saying that 73% of the CEOs and the economists there are predicting a recession in 2023, so we will see. Now, as for Wall Street this morning, well, it's been up about 4%, the S&P 500, since the beginning of January, and that's down to China. That's down to China's reopening in very, very large part. And Wall Street was buoyed to hear from Liu He, the Vice Premier, today, saying that China is open for business and that the issue of COVID is now steady. But Wall Street this morning is down, mainly because Goldman Sachs is down by 7%. So we have the Dow off by 1% and the other two by about 1/5 of 1%.
Why is Bitcoin rising despite all the crypto worries?
Yes. Next question. I don't know. I mean, it's a mystery to me as well and everybody else here, quite frankly. I mean, the situation is that on Saturday, Bitcoin went above 21,000 for the first time in about 2 months. And it is up about 28% along with those stocks. It's up since January. And today, when I checked just now, it stands at 21,187. But, you know, that is a long way, Jamie and Robin, from where it was just a year ago at around $68,000, $69,000, something like that. Analysts still predict it to come down to around 10,000 before it really takes off again. And all of this because despite the FTX story, the second biggest cryptocurrency exchange, and the Sam Bankman-Fried and the court cases and all of that, last week we saw Coinbase and cryptocurrency laying off 20% of their staff. There's a real contagion and lack of confidence within the crypto world just now. I asked somebody today, why is Bitcoin up? Apparently, people investing in it think that the Federal Reserve might cut interest rates later this year, which would help the currency. I don't think that's going to happen, but there you go. Who knows? And all I can tell you is that regulation is coming big time for crypto to make it an asset class, just like any other asset class. It's properly regulated and backed up by funds in case something goes wrong.
It's going to be an interesting couple of days. Some big names reporting this week.
Yeah, it's funny because Alcoa used to always begin earnings season here, and now that's the aluminium company. They're not reporting until tomorrow, Wednesday. But we have the banks starting now, and that was last Friday. They continued today, as I just said. But as the week goes on, Wall Street will be looking for signs of slowing down, all the time remembering that the Federal Reserve decides on interest rates again on the 1st of December. So after the bell tonight, United Airlines, the airlines are having a pretty good time, Alcoa tomorrow, and then Thursday we've got Netflix, which is one of these modern companies that really has become a bellwether. So Netflix goes, so the Dow Jones tends to go, and they will report after the closing bell late in the evening in Europe on Thursday.
John, thank you for that. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Our correspondent John Terrace on Wall Street.
The death toll from Saturday's bombing of an apartment block in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro has risen to 44.
The authorities say that a child's body is among the latest retrieved from the rubble, adding that there is now little hope of any further survivors being found alive. The shelling, which President Zelensky has described as a war crime, is the deadliest attack on a civilian target in Ukraine in months. Russia continues to deny that civilian infrastructure is being targeted, instead blaming Kyiv for organising the strike. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed reports from Kyiv.
Oh, the numbers that you're citing are correct. 44 now, that is the death toll in that hit on the residential building in Dnipro. A few hours ago, the search and rescue emergency services here called off the search and rescue, saying that there's no hope of finding anyone else alive. So with 20 people still missing, it's safe to assume that that death toll, the number, is going to rise. Also 79 injured, and back to the number of casualties, the people who were killed, 5 of those are children. The latest news that we're getting in connection with that strike is that an advisor, a close advisor to the president here, Volodymyr Zelensky, has reportedly resigned, Alexei Arestovich, and reportedly he has resigned in controversy related to this Dnipro residential complex hit. Over the weekend, Amnesty International issued a report accusing Volodymyr Zelensky of endangering Ukraine's civilians by placing military personnel in residential areas. And that was somewhat of a scandalous report. There was controversy, and reportedly this resignation is connected with all of that. The details aren't in just yet, but that is the latest in connection with that strike. The Kremlin is saying that they were not targeting civilians.
Russia's top military chief has made an unannounced trip to Ukraine. Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu can be seen handing out awards to troops at an army barracks. The trip comes just days after Russia's defence ministry said it had taken control of the key town of Soledar, a claim that Ukraine continues to dispute. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. So, Stuart, what do we know about this visit?
Well, not very much, and that seems deliberate from the Russian Ministry of Defence. First of all, not announcing it beforehand so as to avoid any chance, presumably, of any kind of disruption or at least even an attack from the Ukrainian armed forces. They mentioned that the defence minister was somewhere in the area of the special military operation, as it's known here, and was no more specific than that. The Ministry of Defence said he handed out awards to soldiers who had acted particularly bravely, that he thanked the servicemen for what they were doing there, and with generals of the Eastern Military District, which is active in Ukraine, discussed the kinds of needs they have. He said to the troops, "You are serving with dignity, you are defending our fatherland, you are helping those who need help." As to an update on exactly what Russia sees as the priorities for the special military operation, there wasn't anything too enlightening from the Ministry of Defence on Tuesday, but we did hear from the Russia-installed head of the Donetsk region, who gave an update on Soledar, that the important point of intense battles between Ukraine and Russia. He suggested that the private military company Wagner is still, in his words, cleaning up around Soledar, and they took a train station on Tuesday, implying that there is still activity there, but not contradicting the claims by Russia that this is now a town under Russian military control.
And Stuart, the Kremlin has announced a major shake-up of the military over the next 3 years. What might that mean?
Yeah, it is pretty major. The two things people are looking at are the increase in the number of troops being required for the Russian military and a big change to the way that it operates. So let's start with the troops. In 2017, Russia said it needed 1 million active service personnel. Then last summer, they said they needed 150,000 more. Now, in only 6 months, the Ministry of Defence says it needs 500,000 more troops. So just in a few months, deciding that 350,000 more needed to be found somewhere. So it's a huge amount for the Russian Defence Ministry to find at a time when, of course, it's not the most exciting prospect for any young man in Russia to want to join the military, with the fact that active operations are ongoing. That's on top, remember, of 300,000 civilians who have been mobilised, and then the private military contractors on top of that. Russia clearly still needs plenty more people. Then the other big part of this announcement was the change to the military district structure in Russia. Why that's important: there are currently 5 military districts: Eastern, Western, Southern, Central and Northern. Russia says it's going to now have a Moscow one and a Leningrad one as well to absorb these new troops. New weapons will be provided and new equipment, and also a new army corps which could be up to 20,000 troops for the region of Karelia, which borders Finland, a 1,300 kilometre part of the border that Russia has with Western Europe, which may become a NATO border if Finland does eventually join NATO. And so concern clearly in the Russian Ministry of Defence about making sure that area is well defended. All of that on top of a 40% budget increase for the Russian military since 2022 going into 2023. So big changes for the Russian military, as you would expect.
Stuart, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Stuart Smith in Moscow.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, all the day's action from the Australian Open as Novak Djokovic returns to his winning ways.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Novak Djokovic has made a winning return to the Australian Open tennis tournament 12 months after he was deported over a COVID vaccination row. The 9-time champion was given a hero's welcome and won his first-round tie against Roberto Caballes Baena in straight sets. Djokovic is hoping to equal Rafael Nadal's record 22 Grand Slam singles titles. There was also a thrilling 5-set win for Andy Murray, who stunned 13th seed Matteo Berrettini in an encounter lasting almost 5 hours. The two-time Wimbledon champion has been plagued by hip problems over the last 5 years.
I've certainly questioned myself at times, and there's certainly a lot of people questioned me and my ability and whether I could still perform at the biggest events and the biggest matches. And you know, I felt very proud of myself after the match, and that's not something that I generally felt over the years at the end of tennis matches.
Women's second seed Ostrava needed 3 sets to beat Tamara Zidansek, the Tunisian's bidding for her first Grand Slam title after finishing in second place at the US Open and Wimbledon last year. Fourth seed Caroline Garcia is also through after making easy work of her tie against Canadian qualifier Catherine Seeboff.
Well, extreme weather has also had an impact on day 2, with matches being delayed due to both scorching heat and heavy rain. 36-degree heat forced a 3-hour stoppage on the outside courts. British number 2 Dan Evans was one of the players affected. He eventually made it through to the second round in 4 sets. Then in the evening, a storm brought heavy rain, leaving 11 matches unfinished. Russian and Belarusian flags have been banned from the tournament. Organisers originally permitted spectators to bring in flags, but reversed that policy following criticism from the Ukrainian ambassador to Australia after fans displayed a Russian flag during a match involving a Russian and a Ukrainian. The Russian embassy says the ban is another example of unacceptable politicisation. Michael Ward runs one of the most prestigious luxury stores in the world.
The boss of Harrods was once a chartered accountant before getting into retail. But he told Global Business Europe that it was getting his hands dirty in his first job that taught him one of the most valuable lessons.
I think people will be surprised. My first job was picking potatoes in a field in a farm in Yorkshire. And it didn't give me anything in my life in terms of how to run a luxury store. But at that time in life, it taught you that actually if you worked hard, you could get money to be able to get the things that you wanted. And I think that's the message that's probably stayed with me throughout the whole of my life.
Now, with Spring Festival less than a week away, many traditional crafts are returning to market fairs and streets in China.
One of those is sugar painting, a form of traditional Chinese folk art which is said to date back more than 500 years.
Our correspondent Xu Xinchen took a British friend to meet a sugar painting master.
Red lanterns, paper cuttings, Spring Festival decorations are on display everywhere. Wild snacks and traditional crafts filled with the New Year's vibe are back. I took my friend James Alexander from the UK to get our hands dirty with sugar painting.
李老师打扰了，李老师好啊。你们好，你们好。
Records of the art of sugar painting can be traced back centuries in Sichuan. It is now part of China's intangible cultural heritage. And Li Mei is a certified inheritor of the sweet art.
Sugar paintings are very popular during Spring Festival, and kids and those people who come to festival fairs love this traditional culture. It makes me very happy since it is made of sugar. It's a sweet art.
James and I also tried to draw our own sugar rabbits.
2 rabbits. Let's do rabbit cheers. And oh, let's do rabbit cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, yeah. Happy New Year.
Year.
Happy Spring Festival.
And we took a bite. In addition to their looks, the crunchy malt sugar is the secret to giving the sweet treat the smell and the flavor.
It takes about a week or so to sprout to 3 to 5 centimeters. We have to water it every day. Then I crush it before mixing it with sticky rice, corn, or cooked sweet potatoes.
It then needs a fermentation process that lasts a half day before boiling the mixture into syrup. Lee's crafty hands can make over 100 sugar paintings a day. But she needs a lot more effort behind the scenes.
I can do a sugar painting in 1 or 2 minutes, but it also takes much time for me to boil the syrup, wrap it, and prepare the marble counter. It is not just a 1-minute craft. I spend a lot more time at home preparing.
Yet, the time with care invested offers people a real experience of the Spring Festival. And for our sugar painting master Li Mei, she wants the world to know about the sweet craft filled with Spring Festival spirits. Fu Xinchen, CGTN, Chongqing.
The headlines again. We're open for business and the economy will return to normal growth. China's Vice Premier tells the World Economic Forum.
China's economy grows by 3% last year, exceeding some forecasts but below the official target.
And it's the end of the road for the UK's big hope for a battery manufacturer for electric vehicles.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.